Yeah, I wanted to do another open letter to secular scientists. See, science began as a as evidence of creation. But Isaac Newton, all his work was to prove that there was a creator. Of course, he had a theology of his own that he spent more time talking about than he did talking about science. And even so, people are impressed with his principles of mathematics that he wrote just as on the spur of the moment, as needed or as required, just to figure out what was wrong, you know, or what was going on. So what happened eventually is that the secularists, people that believed in deep time and uh, long ages, eventually took over the science classes, the science labs, the peer review, and the educational system because they can't stand the idea of hearing the fact that they have a creator. So it's amazing. It's amazing that people would go to such trouble to avoid the obvious. So we have about maybe 4 major groups of sciences that I want to address. The first one being cosmology. It's it's obvious that when speaking of cosmology, the scientists, the first thing they like to talk about is the billions of light years. And they think they have an open and shut case for millions of years by measuring the 13.8 billion or so light years as far as they can see. The only problem is that the measurement is of an expanded universe that was not expanded. So when you expand distance, you also expand time, the rate of time, so that time runs faster. And it's not a valid measure of the historical time, and it doesn't take into account creation. As a matter of fact, in cosmology, whether people like to admit it or not, there is no absolute or single measure of time or distance in the universe. So that means it's absurd to come up with an age or size of the universe because it's an expanded fabrication. The Bible says in 18 or so places, 17 or 18 places, that God stretched out the heavens. So it's not just a single, or not just a spur of the moment, something somebody just happened to say. It was mentioned and repeated by different authors in Scripture. So it's a significant thing that the heavens were stretched out, and that's the evidence that we see. And the thing is that when you stretch out space, you're stretching out the rate of time, so that time runs by faster. So everything was no time and no distance until after the heavens were stretched out and you have the appearance of billions of years. And depending on where you are, you have a fast rate of time. Because that's the thing. There's no single rate of the measure of the passing of time, because it varies depending on where you are in the universe. So how can you say that you have an age of the universe that is such and such age when it's all an expanded fabrication of time? It's all, it's all neither here nor there. It makes no difference. It's because with God, a day is like 1,000 years. 1,000 years is like a day. It's relativity. It's a fabrication. It's a stretched out, expanded fabrication that's neither here nor there in regard to actual historical time. So in the Bible, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth on the first day. And it said darkness covered the surface of the earth at the time on the first day. And then he said, let there be light. And there was light. There was evening and morning one day. Okay? So it's kind of useless to say that there's the universe is 13.8 billion years old when what you're looking at is an expanded rate of time, a rate of time that was expanded. It was a slow rate of time that was stretched out. Stretch out space, you stretch out the rate of time. So that it actually gives an appearance of an old age, except that it's an expanded fabrication. And how hard is it for an infinite, all-powerful God to create the universe? How hard is it? And the fact that he said he stretched it out makes it possible for us to see the stars. Okay. Well, that's one thing. And another thing that people don't really like to talk too much about is the black hole and the distance it is from here to the center of a black hole. They like to measure around the black hole because they say it's pointless to measure through the center, obviously, because you're dealing with numbers close to infinity when you're trying to measure into the center of a black hole. And so that the radius of a black hole is actually greater than the circumference of a black hole, which is a scientific matter-of-fact statement that is made in the literature. So it's understood, but it's rarely even talked about. And because somehow people don't like to talk about, different rates of times, and the fact that when you expand space, when space expands, you're also expanding time. And but the evidence is that the universe was expanded, and we have the redshift to prove it. We have the cancellation or the absorption bars to prove it. So that's one thing. It's cosmology, which also brings to mind the cause of the universe. You can't have matter causing matter. You can't have time and space causing time and space. It's absurd because of the fact that energy is running down, going from order to disorder in the universe, so that eventually there will be no more energy to speak of. Everything will be dark and cold. That's a known fact in science. The problem is how did it get ordered? How did energy get bound up? How did it get bunched up when the vacuum of space just stretches everything out, when it causes the gas to separate, to spread out. It doesn't cause things to bunch up. How did they get bunched up? How did the energy get ordered? How did it get made? Because matter can only be what it's forced to be. And as we'll see in biology, matter can only do what it's programmed or made to do. So you have that problem, is the origin of matter, because matter can't be the origin of matter. It can't be the cause of itself, and it can't be the cause of itself being ordered or bound up. So you have that problem. So either way, it requires a maker, because you have the matter being forced to be what it is. You have it being ordered or bound up or bunched up. And when that's contrary to the expansion, and the energy is all dissipating, and the universe, after a very long time, will be cold and dark, and there won't be any more energy to speak of for there to be light even. But that would be, of course, a very, 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 very long time. It's numbers we can't even comprehend, for that matter. Just like billions of years can't be comprehended. The Earth being 4.5 billion years is totally absurd, because those are numbers you can't even comprehend. 50 million years would have run down the Earth, so that it's not even livable, as we'll see in geology. So the next field of science that the secular scientists have destroyed and made a mockery of is biology, especially biology. And because obviously we talked about energy can't make itself, matter can't make itself, and neither can biology make itself. So we have matter that can't make itself, and we have matter that can't order itself, and we also, in biology, we have matter that can't program itself. It can't order itself. There's no intent or purpose to put things in directed working order of any kind. It's just not there. You don't have any mind. A mind can't, if you don't have a mind, if you have a mindless matter, you can't make a mind. Because a mind can't result from mindless matter. It's just absurd. It's totally absurd. Not in a million years, not in a billion years, not in 20 billion years. You can't even make the proteins by chance, by random chance, even if you tried every second. For 20 billion years, you can't make an average size protein of 400 amino acids in length protein chain. Not to mention the folding correctly. Not to mention you have to have all the other amino acids, proteins and folding. And not to mention that you have to have the programming, the sequencing of the DNA molecule that has all the instructions to make all the proteins in the first place. and the structure of the organism, what the organism is going to turn out to be. That's all encoded in the DNA molecule. So it's really not doing justice to science by saying that biology or organisms made themselves, or that matter programmed and not only sequenced but put together proteins for an organism to exist. And even if you had an organism, like people like to say, oh, we're not talking about biogenesis, we don't want to talk about biogenesis, and we want to make it acceptable to religious people. There's maybe God made the organism, and we'll figure out biogenesis later. So we'll have the religious people believing that God made the organism, and then that it was evolution over time that made everything there is. But it's a long ways up. Like it's a staircase up a mountain, like Richard Dawkins says. It's a bottleneck every step of the way. It's an impossibility every step of the way. It's you're basically depending on random chance or magic, for that matter, to order living organisms, and not only that, to order different kinds of organisms all at the same time in the same place. So it's not just one living organism that you have to get sequenced and programmed. It's simultaneously you have to have thousands of different organisms being programmed and sequenced at the same time in the same place that are beneficial to each other or essential to each other in some ways. Speaking of which, in biology, you have 17 of the elements, the table of elements that are essential to living organisms, not even considering molecules that are derived from the elements. The elements themselves that are essential, absolutely essential for life to exist, are 17 of the most common elements. Plus, you have an additional amount, an equal amount of about the same number of elements, additional elements that are beneficial to living organisms in one way or another. So, in other words, matter is basically made to be programmable and programmed inside of us. And the beneficial elements could also include, besides the essential elements, the beneficial elements could include silicon, which is basically what we're standing on. It's basically what the earth is made out of. How can life exist without an earth to live on? So that's basically an essential element too, for that matter, or if, at least a beneficial element. But it's not inside the organism, but it's an essential element that's even outside the organism. And of course, the physics, way the earth is structured, you have the ocean, you have the mountains, you have the continents moving around, and such that, and the interior magma that's floating on. It's it's a very complicated balance, to be able to have earth and water and life to live on the planet, both in the ocean and on land. So we should know that the life in the sea, the ocean was made, the life on land was made, and people were made. Each thing was made to be what it is, to reproduce after its own kind. In other words, each living organism was given a set of instructions that determines what it is, what it turns out to be. It's a given set of instructions that determine everything you are. Okay? And which is not the same for other organisms. There's different vast amounts of programming that so-and-so likes to call junk DNA, which is not junk DNA. They found out it's not junk DNA. It has useful, so how can it be junk DNA if it's being used and essential for the organism to live? So we have a lot of information or programming that other organisms don't have. And of course, when they want to compare the organisms, they want to compare the protein coding parts of the DNA. So that way it makes everything look almost identically the same, just with little differences, because everything basically has the same basic protein structure and the same growth patterns. And the only thing is the outcome is different. The outcome is different because everything's made for a different purpose and a different reason. And each thing was made for a reason, you know. And of course, we're losing. That's why you don't want to lose life. You don't want to lose the wolf. You don't want to lose the lion. You don't want to lose the elephant. You don't want to lose the animals because they are beneficial in a sense, maybe even essential to life on Earth. When you consider everything, all the gophers, the rabbits, the squirrels, and the hawks, and the foxes, and everything is running after, they're all running after each other and stuff. That is all basically essential for there to be a vibrant life on Earth, of course, because whatever humans leave parts of the Earth untouched, they flourish with life. They flourish. They go back there. Let's say there was a war, they couldn't go there. They go back there. Life is flourishing without the humans interrupting or destroying the life there. So all of this stuff is essential, and of course, people like to talk about climate change, and if you're really serious about climate change, you would be planting trees, because trees, not only do they take up carbon dioxide, they also give us food and oxygen. Okay, and they also help the environment. In other words, they'll keep the deserts from forming and all the stuff. The environment, they help everything. So if you're really serious about climate change, why don't you start planting trees where trees are scarce and where they could flourish? And eventually you can take over even deserts, with time, as if you had enough time or after certain amount. But you have to start somewhere. You have to start taking care of the climate, taking care of the animals in one place or another, because of course we're told in scripture to take care of the animals as well, and not to destroy things, of course. So that's biology, which is really used to take over the classrooms, take over the educational system, to take over the peer review system, and to kick the creationists out. You have scientists saying they don't want creationists in their laboratory. They have no place for a creationist in their laboratory. In the meantime, they're looking for aliens. So that shows you what good their thinking is of thinking, believing that there's no creator. Oh, they're off wasting money looking for things that they'll never even find. They're looking for particles of matter that they can't find, dark matter that they can't find. They're looking for all kind of stuff, spending lots of money looking for things that don't even exist. So, which you could probably, if you do the math right, you could probably straighten out with the just looking at the gravitational lensing correctly, because you're probably not taking into account everything that causes gravitational lensing. So we'll go back to astronomy or cosmology or physics, basically, to which is another thing. It's another field of science. So we'll go back to physics and talk about that a little bit, because physics, when you talk about gravitational lensing, they will say there's two things that cause gravitational lensing. So we know one is the bending of space, the other is the dilation of time. Okay, and that's true. It would be the bending of space and the dilation of time, those which would slow down the rate of the speed of light. The dilation of time. Time slows down, so it takes longer for light to pass through. Okay, that's fine. And the bending of light, of course, we know what bending of light is through lenses that causes gravitational lensing. That's why we call it that. There's two more things that cause gravitational lensing. They're probably not even in the books. And that would be the dilation of distance. Not only you have the dilation of time, you have the dilation of distance too, which will compact a lot of space in one area so that it'll take longer for light to pass through that area because of the amount of space that is in that one location because of gravity. Okay, so that's probably one thing people are not taking into account, because I never heard anybody talk about it when I was reading the books. So besides that, you also have the dragging of space. The dragging of space would be like light having to flow upstream, against the current, against the current of the dragging of space. That's another thing that would compound the gravitational lensing effect. Very, very near to a black hole, obviously. I don't know how much it would affect the outer regions of the galaxy, but that could be a cause for gravitational lensing. But the dilation of distance is also going to have effect, because if you're talking about the dilation of time, the dilation of distance is also going to have an effect. So one way, if you want to think about it, is that light will travel 186,000 miles in 1 second. So 1 second would be like saying 1,001. 1,001, and light traveled 186,000 miles. Okay, near a black hole, let's say that we're talking about a non-rotating black hole, because a rotating black hole is too complicated, because you have all that dragging of space and all kind of crazy stuff going on. So we'll talk about a hypothetical non-rotating black hole, which probably doesn't exist. And we'll say that if you go near this black hole, it will contract the distance, which is what relativity is. Contract the distance, which is what gravitational waves are, is dilation of distance. So it'll contract 186,000 miles to a distance comparable. If you're going to look at one over here and one over there, it will be comparable to, say, a mile or so. So over here you have 1,001, and it travels 186,000 miles. That 186,000 miles will contract down to an area comparable to 1 mile. So then you have the same rate of the speed of light, which be 1,001 in 1 second, 186,000 miles, not only it'll travel less distance compared, but relatively speaking, from one place, comparing one place to the other, it'll also slow down time so that it'll travel the comparable distance of 1 mile, which is 186,000 miles there. It'll be 1,001, only it'll be a slower second. It'll be 1,001. So it takes longer for light to travel less distance than it does with 186,000 miles where we're at, 1,001. Bam, 186,000 miles. So that's what relativity is. So anyways, that's what causes the gravitational lensing that would compound the gravitational lensing. So you probably don't even need dark matter. The dark energy is supposed to be what caused the expansion. That's the creation event that caused the expansion. Of course, the farther you go, the more time in the past it was. So it's besides the fact of compounding the expansion, the farther away you go, it's also farther in a relative past, So that could mean that the universe was expanding faster in the past than what it is now, if it exceeds all those measurements. But anyways, you might not even need dark matter for gravitational lensing if you factor correctly the dilation of distance, because I've already checked it out myself. When you contract the distance near a black hole, there's a lot of frames of reference of 186,000 miles near the black hole that the light has to travel through, which will make it take longer. Not only will make it take longer because it has to travel through more frames of reference, but because time is slowing down, which is also a factor. Anyway, so back to the biology. It's just absurd to think that an unrelated change to a given genome is going to write programming that's not there. Now, the only way possible that you could ever increase the genome is by duplicating the same information that you already have, which will not produce programming that's not already in the genome, and it usually causes problems anyways. But supposedly that's what they think happens, and that somehow the extra information allows for more magical things to happen somehow, without any direction, without any intent, which is really rather absurd, considering that there's only been 5,000 years since Noah anyway. I mean, so you're looking at the fossil record, which is the result of the global flood, which is the next topic, and you're saying that those are millions of years. No, they're not millions of years. It's not even 5,000 years, because it goes back to Noah, who lived 500 years before the flood. So whenever they make a calendar, they're making it back to Noah, who lived 500 years before the flood. So, and all the calendars, they're all 5,000 years. The Hindu calendar is 5,000 years. The Chinese calendar, 5,000 years. This is plus or minus, of course. The Mayan calendar, 5,000 years old. The history, 5,000 years old. The genealogy is 5,000 years old. It all goes back to the same time. Abraham was a Sumerian. You go back to the Sumerians, that was basically the first culture that we know of, the Sumerians, and of course the Hindus. They all go back, and the Chinese and the Egyptian, they all go back to the same time, because that's when civilization started over again after the global flood. So Egypt began by Mitzrayim, Mitzrayim is Noah's grandson. Whenever the Bible refers to Egypt, it doesn't say Egypt, it says Mitzrayim, because that's the founder of Egypt is Mitzrayim, along with his mother, who's named Egyptus. Okay? That's where Egypt came from. And the same thing for everything else. You know, Abraham was a Samaritan. People talk about Samaritan this, Samaritan this is big, you know. Abraham was a Samaritan, came from a Samaritan city. He left the Samaritan city, went to Israel. He went to Jerusalem, where possibly one of Noah's sons was living. Noah's son Shem was living. And of course, Abraham was allegedly raised by Noah's son Shem because he had to flee for his life because his father was an idol maker, and he smashed the idols and put the hammer in the biggest idol's hand and said the biggest idol did it. And, so he had to run for his life, and they killed somebody else, and because they thought it was Abraham. So Abraham lived in, ran away, and then he came back later. They threw him in a furnace, and Abraham didn't die and stuff like that. But that's neither here nor there. But anyway, so Abraham was a Samaritan. He came from Ur of the Chaldees, which is a Samaritan city. They found in Ur, some idols there. Okay, Abraham's father was an idol maker. So either Abraham's father made those idols, or he knew the person that made those idols that they found. So that's another thing. So we have it's not just the Bible that we go by. I mean, the Bible is real history of real people that we're all related to, but it's not just the Bible that's evidence of creation. The creation itself is evidence of God. So that's where Newton was, Sir Isaac Newton, was that he was looking at creation and saying, well, creation is evident, so let me prove that it's evident of creation. So that's where he was at, and that's where I'm at too, for that matter. So I'm looking at creation as evidence of the creation of God. So everything that was made. So because you can't credit mindless matter for the programming and the formation of living organisms. That's ascribing magic to matter. That's idolatry. That's age-old idolatry. What Abraham had, the problem that he had with his father making idols, and he smashed the idols. That's the age-old problem, is idolatry. A friend of mine that probably nobody knows, but his name's Moish Rosen. He said mankind flows to idolatry. Mankind clings to the earth. Mankind is like, dead because of his vain practices, his vain beliefs, his vain, the worthless things that he does. Is just dead. And the commandment of God is eternal life. Jesus said the commandment of God is eternal life. God's command is for us to live, not to die, not to live in vain practices that'll do us no good. We have to recognize the truth and tell the truth, and be honest about the history that we have, the genealogies that we have, the calendars that we have, and the cosmology, biology, and physics, and paleontology and geology that we have. So the other thing is the geology. the geology is the result of the global flood. It's so obvious. Now, I don't know why. I don't know why it's so hard to get evidence. If you search for the evidence, if you Google right now, say how much sedimentary rock is there? You can't find the answer when you Google. At least I haven't found it. If you look for you know uh, you know the amount of geology on every continent around the world. Okay, I've been researching it for a while, and I estimated that was about 90 some million cubic miles around the Earth, just with vague information here and there. And then I was saying it's 96 million cubic miles or whatever it was. I said 91. And some geology says, no, it's more like it's 134 million cubic miles. But if you do it by the way Google does it, or whatever, whatever searches you have, they'll say the Earth's crust is 1% of the volume of the Earth, and they'll say that the sedimentary layers are 5% of the Earth's crust. Or even some even say 8% of the Earth's crust, the sedimentary layers. Now that's a wild and crazy number, because that'll give you like 900 million cubic miles of sedimentary rock, but which I don't think is even accurate. But the amount of sedimentary rock around the world that the continents are made of is over 1.5 miles deep around the world, with the exception of some places where igneous rock is punching up through the sedimentary rock as a result of the the geologic activity going on at the time of the global flood, and the water sinking into the oceans, and the oceans getting deeper, and things like that. So there was a lot of movement going on, and a lot of igneous rock coming through. But it's only like I don't know, one third of the Earth's, or 1/4 of the Earth's surface. Land area, or something like that. And the rest is all sedimentary rock. And the sedimentary rock is on average is 1.5 miles deep. So you can even measure the surface area of the continents around the world, multiplied by 1.5 miles deep, and you can get the numbers 90 million cubic miles of water deposited sediments, consecutive layers of water deposited sediments with fossils in them, land and marine animals buried together in sedimentary rock over 1 mile deep, everywhere around the world, all around the world. That geology is the evidence of the global flood. And here geologists are doing all kinds of crazy calculations and this and that and the other thing, and they're not even looking at the evidence. They're not even looking at the evidence of geology, of what geology is. It's over 100 million cubic miles of water deposited sediments everywhere around the world, including Antarctica. And it's land and marine animals mixed in every layer except for the topmost layers, which everything had already died off and been buried towards the end of the global flood, which survived. And only the animals we have today are the ones that survived, either in the water or on Noah's Ark, which had all the animals. It sounds like a silly story, but it's a true story. It's a true factual story, and the evidence is geology. The evidence is consecutive layers of water deposited sediments, one on top of the other, over 1 mile deep. And an example of that is the Grand Canyon. You can look straight down a mile deep. There's nothing but consecutive layers of water deposited sediments over a mile deep. And the sediment layers have land and marine fossils mixed together. Whenever you find looking for dinosaur bones, you have marine animals mixed in. You have mammals mixed in. It's all there. You can make up all these stories and ask for Cambrian rabbits, but the Cambrian is sea life. How are you going to have rabbits where there's sea life? Those are the first things to get buried. So you got to use a little common sense. There are mammals buried with dinosaurs that are largely ignored because they're mammals. They're not as interesting as dinosaurs. And they're routinely discarded because they're mammals. And or maybe stashed away in a drawer somewhere. But there's a lot of mammals. The mammals are largely being ignored in favor of the dinosaurs. And they're buried together. So who knows what? We don't even know what is all buried together, because for one thing, we haven't even seen everything that's buried, because there's a lot more buried than there is than what we found. Because of course, it's the continents we live on. So who knows what would be found? And if they ever did find any evidence of humans, which they arguably have found evidence of humans in supposed layers that are older than humans are supposed to have existed. So they invent a chimp that supposedly walked on his hind feet like a human. So that supposedly made the human footprints, where you have the adult making a footprint and the child stepping inside of the adult footprints. Now, what monkey would do that? What monkey would step inside of the footprints of his parents or another adult? That's just absurd. A monkey doesn't even have that kind of mind. So they have these Leotoli footprints, where you have human footprints. They call them human-like, but they're human footprints, and they have the child stepping inside the adult footprints, which speaks volumes to what kind of animal that was. It was a human, not a chimp. So there's that. I mean, there's you could talk forever about this stuff, and then there's archaeology too. There's archaeological finds that support biblical finds and everything like that. So you have the geology, the paleontology, the biology, the cosmology. Secular scientists are making a mockery out of science, out of what we're supposed to be able to know and understand from science. And they're kicking us out because they don't want to hear about a creator, which is, either God is your creator or mindless matter is your creator. Take your pick. Either you're going to be more intelligent and say that a mind produced a mind, or you're going to say mindless matter produced a mind, which is not using your mind, to say the least. More could be said about that. So this is really absurd about secular scientists taking over science and the peer review process. You submit a paper and it gets rejected outright if you're talking about the fact that matter can't make itself, or if you're talking about that matter can't program itself. It'll be rejected outright, no reason given. And yet you have all these scientists hoping for a natural cause, hoping for a magical natural cause where mindless matter will make itself, not only make itself programmable, but mindless matter will program itself to make every directed living organism there is, including humans, to make you the human that you are. It's just totally absurd. Total nonsense, considering that the fossils only 5,000 years old. And we have the record, we have the historical record, we have the geological record to back up Noah's flood with everything that was living at time, living on earth at the time. All the animals that were created living on earth at the time are buried in those layers. They're buried in those layers that we are living on top of. We're living on top of the evidence of the global flood to a large extent, unless you live on top of igneous rock, which in some cases people do. So this is just totally absurd. It's just totally, I'm from the Amazon. I was educated in the Amazon. I went to a private American school in the Amazon. My favorite class was science and Bible. Okay, and we had some science teachers that were like the most difficult teachers ever, and I got the highest scores in the science class because I made an effort and I applied myself in the science classes and in the Bible classes. Those are my favorite subjects. So then when I hear about all this evolution nonsense, I'm saying, how can this stuff be? How can this stuff be? How can people be teaching this nonsense? There is absolutely no evidence that a piece of matter is going to direct anything with intent. And of course, you'll say, oh, but it doesn't do that. It does it by accident. It doesn't. Random mutation going to have any kind of direction or intent other than what the genome was directed to be originally. And that's what it is. It was directed to be a frog. It's going to be a frog. It might be a warped frog. It might be a frog with no eyes. It might be something with no legs. It might be something with whatever. But it's going to be what it was directed to be, and it can't be anything else because that's all it has directions to be. So it's just absurd to be hijacking science class when science was made by creationists for the purpose of showing you that there's a creator, and we're still telling you that there's a creator. There's a creator of everything. There is a creator of matter, made matter programmable, programmed matter inside of you to make you the human that you are instead of some rodent running around someplace or some fish in the sea. And you don't have any respect for that. You don't have any acknowledgement of that. That's sad. It's just so sad. Okay, but you don't have to be forcing it and shoving it on other people. You don't have any evidence, you can't teach about it. If you had evidence, it would be one thing, but you don't have any evidence of a natural cause for natural things because every biological thing is directed, and you can't get direction from no direction. You can't use directed things as evidence of no direction. It's just absurd over and over and over again in every field of science, in every science example of science. Everything science is supposed to be what you can know, and this is what we can know. Okay, I don't want to make this forever, but anyways, that's my open letter to scientists to allow creation back into the science room, science labs. Give us access to the science labs. How can we can't even compete with object credit givers because we don't even have science labs to work with. We have to scrounge up money here and there and to prove that there's soft dinosaur tissue, to prove that there's osteocytes, to prove that there's blood vessels with blood cells in them. We have to scrounge up money here and there for lab equipment and stuff because we've been kicked out of the science lab that are supposed to be for everybody to use. There's not supposed to be any discrimination, especially when you are the ones that are wrong. You are the object credit givers with no justifiable reason to give the glory to mindless, unguided matter. We are the ones with the reason and intelligence of an intelligent being for everything that we see, which is another thing that infinite regress of directed things would be obviously a more knowledgeable, more powerful, more, like I said, knowledge and more insight into making things. So infinite regress of any directed working thing has to be a greater directed working thing until you get to an all-knowing, all-powerful maker of everything that there is in the universe, who's not limited by his fabrication of time and distance that he made and programmed inside of you. That's the only way, because there always has to be a bigger and better maker, a bigger and more powerful maker. So if you go by infinite regress of everything we see, we know that directed working things can't make themselves. It has to be something bigger and better that makes us. You're going to end up with an all-knowing, all-powerful, eternal maker of everything that there is, which is what the Bible was telling us in the first place. So we could go on and on and on and on talking about this, but that's I guess enough for right now. But just, you gotta let us have access to the science labs. You gotta let us compete with secular science, which is total nonsense, total absurdity to begin with. Give us a chance too, because we're the ones that are right. You're the ones that are wrong.